Only I showed up at my husband's funeral. I, Elena Whitford, 79 years old, born and raised in Savannah, stood there in my ash-gray coat, a small figure facing the oak casket that held the man I had loved for more than half a century. No Michael, no Jenna, not a single grandchild, just me, in the courtyard of an old chapel near the edge of Forsyth Park, where the oak trees hung heavy with Spanish moss, drooping as if they were trying to hide how painfully empty this farewell was. A cold wind blew in from the Savannah River, sharp enough to make the hem of my coat tremble. But even that chill couldn't compare to the sight right in front of me, the 5 seats reserved for family, 4 of them completely empty. The funeral director stood beside me, unable to meet my eyes for longer than a couple seconds. He cleared his throat and bowed his head. "Mrs. Whitford, would you like to wait a little longer?" I shook my head. No, Robert hated waiting. Let's begin. Even in the final months of his life, when he needed his arms to push himself upright, Robert kept his routines, taking his medication at the same time every day, never missing the 6 o'clock news, folding his slippers neatly before bed like discipline was the last thing he could still control. A man of order, of dignity, and now of loneliness in his own funeral. I sat in the first row. The second, third, fourth, and fifth rows stayed silent, untouched, as if they'd never expected anyone to sit there. The pastor began to pray, but the wind kept snatching his words away, thinning them out like a thread. The flower arrangements around the casket were almost too bright, like they were trying to make up for the people who didn't bother to come. If Robert were alive, I could imagine him glancing around, eyebrows pulling together. Where's Michael? Where's Jenna? Where are the kids? Yes, where were they? While the funeral home prepared to move the casket to the cemetery, my phone buzzed. A message from Michael. "Sorry, Mom. Something came up. Can't make it." One line, no period, no explanation, no sign of regret, no acknowledgement that instead of standing beside me today, my son was doing something he considered more important. I could picture exactly how he sent that message, one hand typing, the other holding a golf club at Hilton Head, or sitting in his glass-walled office, trying to impress yet another client, like always. Jenna didn't even send a text. 2 days earlier, she'd left a voicemail, her voice far too cheerful for what was coming. "Mom, I really can't cancel my nail appointment, and rescheduling stresses me out. Tell Dad I'll visit him next week, okay?" Next week. As if the dead could wait. I followed the casket to Bonaventure Cemetery. It was so quiet, I could hear every leaf touching the ground. A groundskeeper stood at a distance, leaning on his shovel, his eyes softened with a kind of sadness, as if he understood something wasn't right. When the casket was lowered, I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain had gone beyond the point where tears could form. Some grief sits heavy in your chest like a stone. You don't collapse. You simply stay standing because willpower is doing the job your muscles can't. A small temporary plaque was placed where the headstone would go. Robert Whitford, beloved husband, father, remembered in our hearts. I stopped at the word father. If he was a father who'd be remembered, then where were the children who were supposed to remember him? Back home in our cream-colored wooden house near Liberty Street, the silence felt different. Everything was exactly where he left it. His armchair, his neatly folded slippers, the TV remote in its favorite spot, the wool blanket he used every night. I opened a bottle of red wine, the kind I only used when we had guests, but tonight I opened it just to keep myself from falling apart. I sat at the dining table, took a sip, and then opened Instagram. Not because it was a habit, but because something in me said to look. Jenna's photo appeared first. She was with 3 friends, holding a mimosa, smiling wide. Caption: "Brunch day, living our best life." Posted 2 hours ago, which meant it went up right when the pastor began his first prayer for her father. I scrolled. Michael's latest post, a golf course, a new club, blue sky. Caption: "Deals made, perfect swing." My eyes blurred, not from the wine, from the truth. I put the phone down, walked to a framed picture on the wall. Me and Robert on our 40th anniversary, standing under the magnolia arch he planted when we were young. Tomorrow, I'd call the lawyer. I'd change everything. The will, the plans, the way I'd live the rest of my life. If I was the only one who showed up to bury Robert, then I'd also be the only one to make sure what remains goes to someone deserving. If you've ever had a moment when you realized you were forgotten by the very people who should have loved you most, leave me a comment so I know you're here. And if you want the next chapter of this story, tap like and subscribe. It helps me bring more stories, real ones, deeper ones, and sometimes ones that hurt just a little. When the late afternoon light spilled through the windows, our home, the two-story wooden house that had stood on the corner of Liberty Street for nearly half a century, suddenly felt bigger than usual. Not because the rooms were spacious, but because the silence stretched out like a long, endless hallway. I hung my coat on the wooden hook Robert had made more than 30 years ago. It still leaned a little to the left, crooked in the way he used to say, "Things you make with your own hands, even the flawed parts belong to you." I hadn't straightened it since the day he passed. In the living room, Robert's armchair sat exactly where it always had, angled toward the window so he could see the magnolia tree in the front yard. A small side table still held his unfinished history book, marked with an old grocery receipt from Whitaker Street. I touched the edge of the pages, half expecting to feel the warmth of his hand still lingering there. These little things, once ordinary, now felt like quiet evidence of an absence too large to name. After standing there for a long moment, I walked into the kitchen. I opened the cabinet and pulled out our best bottle of red wine, the one I always kept for guests, or for the rare evenings when Robert said we should celebrate something, even if it's just being alive. There was no one left to celebrate with. I poured myself a full glass, set it on the table, and picked up my phone. Most days, I don't even open social media. But that night, something told me to check Instagram again, even though I knew it would only hurt. And I wasn't wrong. Jenna's picture was still there, bright and cheerful under the Savannah sun, a mimosa lifted like a toast to herself. Caption: "Living our best life." I looked closely at her face, the same face that once buried itself in my shoulder, that cried when she fell off her bike, that hid bad grades in the desk drawer. Now, that face showed no trace of the fact that her father had been buried just hours earlier. I scrolled to Michael's post, a golf course so green it looked over-edited. He stood at an angle, showing off a new club, flashing the smile I'd seen hundreds of times, the smile he saved for everyone except family. I set the phone down. The phone was quiet, the house was quiet, and I was quiet. But inside that silence, something was shifting, something slowly peeling away from the years I had held on to, the belief that children always show up when it truly matters. That night, I opened Robert's desk drawer. In the bottom compartment, behind his old notebooks, was a pale blue folder, the one I had pulled out and shoved back several times during his hospital weeks. On the cover, in his handwriting, was a single word: estate. Just one word, but heavy enough to drag every memory to the surface. I placed it on the bed, pulled off the rubber band, and opened it. Inside were the old will, the asset list, instructions for the house, investment accounts, the cabin at Ogeechee, and long lines of Michael and Jenna. I read each item, each account, each number we had worked for across an entire lifetime. The main savings, nearly $280,000, Robert built from our small construction business. This house, the one he repaired from foundation to roof with his own hands. The lakeside cabin where we camped every summer. His life insurance, the inherited land his parents left behind. Everything, big or small, had Michael and Jenna's names on it. I closed my eyes, not to cry, but because the memories were pulling me backward, to all the years I didn't realize I was planting a dangerous belief in my children, that I would always be there. I went downstairs to the small basement where we kept the family photo boxes, old yellowed pictures. Robert teaching Michael to fish at Tybee Island, me holding Jenna on her first day of kindergarten. The four of us smiling in a Christmas photo, before Logan was even born. Memories so warm that today's reality felt crueler by contrast. I set a picture down and opened another box. the one only I knew about. Inside were the $15,000 transfer for Jenna's wedding, the $8,400 roof repair for her house, $12,000 for Logan's braces, $6,000 for science camp, $22,000 after Jenna's husband lost his job, the $25,000 I gave Michael for his sure thing startup, tax payments, medical bills, car repairs, and every single "Mom, just this one time" that I believed I had kept those papers. Not to keep score, I kept them because I thought, one day my children would understand. But this morning, standing beside Robert's grave, I realized they had forgotten those moments long ago. I brushed dust off a small envelope at the bottom of the box. The handwriting was shaky, from a child. For Grandma Elena, from Logan. Inside it said, "Thank you for teaching me how to make pancakes. I promise someday I'll take care of you the way you take care of me." I sat on the edge of the bed, holding that letter. 11 years had passed. Logan was 19 now, tall, busy with college, living a life too big for childhood promises. I didn't know if he remembered writing that letter, but I did. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. I closed the folder, stood up, and walked out of the room. The Savannah night slipped through the cracked window, carrying a whisper through the Spanish moss outside, like someone murmuring, "It's time." Tomorrow I would meet with the lawyer, not to share bad news, but to fix something that had been wrong for far too long. I had handed everything to people who didn't deserve it, and I had stayed silent for too many years. Not anymore. I didn't turn on the lights when I stepped out of the bedroom. This house on Liberty Street had always known darkness. The darkness of nights when Robert stayed up reading the newspaper. The darkness of evenings when I sat knitting in the corner of the living room. The darkness that lived inside tiny cracks only I ever noticed. But tonight, the darkness carried a different scent. The scent of a decision. I walked straight to Robert's desk. The desk he used to jokingly call Whitford headquarters, where he wrote every invoice, every construction contract, where he hunched over tiny numbers to make sure our family always had enough. I sat down. The wood felt cold under my palm, cold like the morning we buried him. Left drawer, right drawer, until I found the small key tucked between old pins, the key to the last drawer. My hand shook as I slid it in, not out of fear, but because I knew opening it meant facing something I had avoided for years. Click. The drawer opened. Inside was the estate folder, blue, faded at the edges. I laid it on the desk, pulled the chair closer, and removed the rubber band holding it shut. The first page appeared. Whitford Family Asset Distribution. Robert's handwriting, firm, steady, never once trembling. I turned the page. Michael Whitford, Jenna Collins. Both names marked clearly. Half each. The house, the Ogeechee cabin, the investment accounts, nearly $280,000. Everything we had saved over a lifetime of work. I stared until the letters blurred. Robert had written this will 2 years before he fell sick. Back then, I believed what he believed, that fairness meant splitting things evenly. This morning showed me something different. Some children don't need fairness, they need boundaries. I stood up, walked down the long hallway, and opened the storage room door. A breath of old paper drifted out, the scent of all the years I collected receipts like they were proof of motherhood. I stepped inside and switched on the dim yellow light. Boxes stacked high. Robert used to call this place the family museum. On the bottom shelf sat the box I'd been looking for. Label, Michael and Jenna, support. I carried it to the kitchen table, opened it, and started peeling through the years. A transfer slip, $15,000, Jenna's wedding. An invoice, $8,400, her roof repair after the storm. A bank transaction, $12,000, Logan's braces. Then came Michael's, $25,000, for a guaranteed win startup. $14,800, for a safer car for the kids. $9,300 hospital bills when Sophia gave birth, $10,000, taxes from the year he was audited. All paid with our money, mine and Robert's. I exhaled, a long breath I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. I didn't cry. I think I no longer had tears left for things I allowed to happen myself. I reached for a thin envelope buried in the corner. Pale yellow, almost forgotten. Childish handwriting. To Grandma, from Logan. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet folded in thirds, written in a wobbly pencil. Grandma, thank you for teaching me pancakes. I promise, when I grow up, I'll take care of you like you take care of me. I sat down, pressing my palm to my chest. I remembered the morning Logan wrote it, rain tapping on the kitchen window, the smell of burnt batter from his first attempt, the way he grinned anyway, like he'd won something important. I folded the letter carefully, as if it were the only warm thing left in this cold house. Then I gathered the estate folder and the small letter and went upstairs. I set them side by side on the bed. 2 generations. One that thought I was a wallet, one that saw me as a person. I knew I couldn't let the past dictate the future anymore. I couldn't let Robert's will, written with love, become the thing that buried his final hope, that kindness should go to someone worthy. I picked up my phone. My hands no longer shook. I called Harold Benton, the man who'd handled every important document for our family for more than 30 years. The phone rang 3 times, no answer. I waited for the beep, then said, Harold, this is Elena Whitford. I'll be at your office first thing tomorrow. I need to revise the entire will, and it can't wait. I hung up. The old grandfather clock, Robert's grandfather's, began to chime in the hallway. Each strike sounded like another heart beating inside the house, echoing my own. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking out the cracked window. Spanish moss swayed in the night breeze. Savannah was quiet, but inside me, something was shifting. Not grief, not memory, clarity. Tomorrow would be the first day of my life where I no longer waited for my children to show up on time. Tomorrow, I would place everything back where it belonged, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I finally understood. Fairness isn't dividing things evenly. Fairness is giving things to the ones who truly value them. The next morning, Savannah carried the kind of cold only it understood. Not northern cold, nothing sharp or cruel, but just enough chill to make your breath visible, just enough to make the Spanish moss sway like it was whispering accusations at the sky. I drove to Harold Benton's office on Oglethorpe Avenue, a classic red brick building where the scent of old wood and paper blended into something only 40-year-old law offices ever had. I walked in without an appointment. The door swung open, the little bell above it chiming softly, a sound so familiar it felt like stepping back into the moment I signed our first mortgage with Robert at 35. But today, I was no longer that woman. Harold looked up from behind his desk. His eyes were older than I remembered. He stood immediately. Elena. His voice dipped. I heard about Robert. I'm so sorry. I nodded. I know. Then I sat down, cutting straight through the small talk. I'm here to amend the will. Harold adjusted his glasses, studying me for a moment, the way a man who has seen 100 broken families checks to see if you're speaking from emotion or clarity. What part do you want to change? All of it. I placed the estate folder on the desk. Michael and Jenna will be removed entirely. A long silence settled between us. Not a tense one, the kind reserved for truths that have been ignored for too many years. Are you sure? Harold asked, gently. I looked him straight in the eye. I buried my husband alone. No phone call, no flowers, no apology. Harold nodded, slowly, as if every word I said landed in the same soft, tired place inside him. Who do you want everything to go to? He asked. I reached into my bag and pulled out the pale yellow letter, the one Logan wrote at 11. I set it on the table. To Logan, I said, I want a trust, the house, the cabin, the investments, all of it. But it needs to be protected from his parents. Harold let out a long breath, but there was a small, knowing smile at the corner of his mouth. We can do that, he said. It won't be simple, but it can be done. I nodded. The sooner the better. I don't have the patience for another brunch excuse. He chuckled, the tired, quiet laugh of a man who has seen too many ungrateful children. Then we worked, page after page, clause after clause. Harold explained each part. Unconditional trust, restricted access until age 30, funds allowed only for education and medical needs, no guardian interference, full ownership when he comes of age. I signed each document, each name, each line, as if every signature was placing another piece of my life back where it belonged. No shaking, no hesitation. Maybe because I had already hesitated for 60 years. When we finally finished, Harold set down his pen and looked at me longer than usual. "Elena," he said quietly, "people only do this in 2 states of mind, deep anger or complete clarity." I answered without thinking, "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just clear." He paused, then nodded. "Then it's right." When I stepped outside, the late morning sun had fully risen. Savannah at 10 a.m. always had a honey-colored light, soft, warm, but revealing every quiet corner. I stood at the top of the steps and inhaled deeply, not to steady myself, but to feel something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I thought grief over losing Robert would be the thing that crushed me, but oddly, it was the absence of Michael and Jenna that left the largest emptiness, and that emptiness was finally wide enough to begin again. I drove back to Liberty Street. The house looked different in the morning, still peaceful, still full of memories, but today it felt like a place waiting for its windows to be opened for the first time in years. I walked past the wooden fence Robert repainted after the 2004 storm. The wood was faded, but still standing, just like him. Inside, the usual scent of old wood and black tea rushed out to meet me. I set down my bag, hung my keys on the hook, and stepped into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. No wine, no tea, just water. Something I'd forgotten to drink while caring for Robert. I looked around. This kitchen was where my family grew up, and slowly fell apart. I had stood here feeding children who couldn't remember the last meal they'd ever cooked for me. I set the glass down and whispered, "Enough." Just 2 words, but they cut through a rope that had pulled me for half a lifetime. That afternoon, I opened an old file drawer and found a slip of paper Robert had written years ago, after the family's worst fight when Michael was 17. "Elena, one day you'll have to be tougher. Kindness isn't the same thing as giving yourself away." I had laughed then, told him he worried too much. Turns out, he wasn't worrying. He just saw clearly what I never dared to. By evening, I stepped onto the front porch, the place where Robert loved to read on summer nights. A breeze blew in from the Savannah River, carrying the damp smell of water and the faint sweetness of magnolias. I looked at the fence, the trees, the old street leading to the little square, and for the first time since he died, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt like I was returning to myself. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll start cleaning out Robert's room, not to erase anything, but to keep what's still whole and let go of what has already crumbled. But tonight, I wanted to leave the house exactly as it was, a home waiting for its next rightful owner. The only one who remembered me when everyone else forgot. Logan. Just thinking of him made my chest feel lighter. That night, a thin layer of mist settled over Savannah. Not the kind that chills your bones, but the kind that softens everything it touches. The magnolia tree on the porch, the brick walkway leading to the house. Even Robert's armchair in the living room looked a few steps farther away. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of Earl Grey in front of me, the steam fogging my glasses like a quiet sigh. The house was so silent I could hear the wooden cabinets expanding gently with the humidity. Then the phone rang. The sound startled me so much I spilled a little tea across the tablecloth. I looked at the screen, and my heart tightened. Logan. Not Michael, not Jenna, not a hollow text message. Logan. The only one I had never needed to teach how to say thank you. I answered. "Grandma?" His voice wasn't loud, wasn't confident like Michael's had been at his age. Logan's voice carried a softness, a sincerity, that Jenna's generation never knew how to appreciate. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I kept my voice steady. No, why didn't you call sooner? No, do you know what happened to Grandpa? I didn't want to begin with blame. I wanted him to know my door was still open. Mom didn't tell me, Logan said slowly. I only heard from someone in class. They said they saw an obituary. I didn't believe it, but... I closed my eyes. No tears, no trembling, just a sharp point in my chest. A point I thought had gone numb these past weeks. He passed 3 weeks ago, Logan, I said. I heard his breath catch, small but painfully real. I'm sorry, Grandma, he whispered, his voice cracked. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I know, I said softly, and I truly did. Jenna always assumed I was too naive to see the gaps in her stories. But age doesn't make you blind, it only sharpens the truth. I want to come see you, Logan said. I should have come, and I don't want to leave things like this. I pressed my hand to the table to steady myself. I'm always here, I said. Not in desperation, not in guilt, just the truth. I'll be there in an hour, he said, like he was afraid that if he waited any longer, the shame would settle too deep. I hung up, stood, and looked around the kitchen. There was nothing to prepare. I only smoothed the tablecloth. A habit Robert used to say was how you put the world back in order. While I waited, I didn't sit. I walked through the house, touching each of Robert's things, his chair, his favorite mug, his old leather construction notebook. Then headlights glowed through the window. I opened the door before he could knock. Logan stood there, tall now, almost as tall as the doorway, but his eyes were the same ones he had at 12, the day he brought me a plate of pancakes on a Sunday morning. He stepped inside, holding his knitted beanie, breath still laced with the cool evening mist. We looked at each other for a few seconds. The moment felt strangely familiar, like the first time I met Robert's grandfather. A quiet awkwardness, but warm underneath. I opened my arms. He stepped into them without hesitation. That hug. I hadn't felt anything like it from my own children in years. Maybe that's why it echoed through my chest like a forgotten note in a long, quiet song. We sat in the living room. I poured him lemonade, the kind Robert used to make in summer. He held the glass like Savannah's warmth was sitting right inside it. I don't understand, Logan said. Mom told me Grandpa was just tired, so I didn't ask more. I kept waiting for her to update me. I didn't think. You did nothing wrong, I said gently. Some people avoid the truth not because it hurts, but because it forces them to take responsibility. Logan stared at his drink, then looked up at me. Grandma, I'm really sorry. I know. Just 2 words, but for Logan, they were enough. A long silence followed, but it was the kind that made the room warmer, not colder. Finally, he asked the one question I'd hoped for but didn't dare expect. Are you okay? I looked at my lemonade, and for the first time since Robert died, I answered honestly. No, but I will be. Logan nodded. He didn't offer empty phrases. He didn't try to force comfort. He just listened. Just like Robert used to. Then he said, If you don't mind, maybe I could come by a few times this week? I want to fix the porch rail. It's leaning. I let out a small laugh, tight in my throat. You remember that? Grandpa used to say it's been leaning since I was 8. Logan smiled softly. He said it leans like an old dog with one leg shorter than the other. I smiled, the kind that hurts and heals at the same time. We sat like that for a while, 2 generations, one gone, 2 left behind, sharing a room that used to be crowded, and now felt too big. Before Logan left, he stood, looked at me, and said, Grandma, you're not alone. No grand promises, no rushed attempts to fix what he didn't break, just presence. And sometimes, presence is the purest form of loyalty. I walked him to the door. He squeezed my hand before stepping down the porch steps, a touch I thought I might never feel again. I stayed there after he left, watching him disappear beneath the canopy of Spanish moss. The breeze swept past me, gentle, not cold, but enough to remind me the night wasn't over. And I thought, Some calls take a lifetime to arrive, but when they do, they mend more than people realize. Tomorrow, everything would shift. I had settled the will, but there was still one thing Michael and Jenna didn't know, and my silence wouldn't last much longer. The next morning, Savannah woke under a thin veil of early sunlight, not warm yet, but bright enough to thin the last traces of white mist resting on the old wooden rooftops. I opened the front door and sat in the rocking chair Robert repaired for my 60th birthday. The morning chill made my hands tremble slightly, but my mind was still. I had just lifted my tea to my lips when an engine growled at the end of Liberty Street. A black SUV came speeding toward the house, faster than necessary. Jenna. I exhaled softly. Not out of fear, but because this confrontation had been waiting far too long. Jenna stepped out in her usual hurried stride, oversized sunglasses covering half her face, handbag slung over her shoulder like the world owed her space. She didn't look at the front yard, didn't glance at the rocking chair, didn't see the magnolia vines Robert tended for years. No, she looked only at me, and at the question she came to demand. "Mom," Jenna said, breath tinged with coffee. "Why did I hear from Logan that you're changing the will?" No greeting, no, "How are you?" Not a word about missing her father's funeral, just money. Money, and the entitlement she believed came with it. I didn't invite her inside. I simply nudged my rocking chair a little closer and said, "Sit." Jenna stared at the empty porch chair like it was a foreign object. She stayed standing, hand on hip. "I don't have much time," she said. "Photo shoot with a client today. But I need to know what's going on." I nodded. "Then listen." I set my tea on the small table beside me. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. "Yes, I'm changing the will." Jenna's eyebrows pulled together, as if I just said something offensive. "Why?" she demanded. "After everything Michael and I have done for you? After everything we've shared?" I looked at her for a long moment. Her words echoed in my mind like a discordant tune. "You said everything we've shared," I repeated. "Does brunch on the morning your father was buried count as part of that?" She froze, as if the sentence itself had slapped her. "Mom, I told you, I had an appointment." "You had a nail appointment," I said calmly, "and then brunch. I know, I saw the photos." Jenna went silent. I continued. "You call that sharing. I call it absence." A long, thin silence fell between us, not the kind that heals, but the kind truth creates. After a few seconds, Jenna folded her arms, trying to regain ground. "Mom, you're overreacting. I just need to know if you're doing something unfair." "Unfair?" I repeated. I stood, not loud, not harsh. I placed my hand on the wooden plaque Robert carved in 1985, the one that read, "Home is where you show up." Then I looked back at Jenna. "The day your father died," I said, "only one person showed up, and it wasn't you." Jenna stepped back half a pace, the first time I'd ever seen her retreat from truth instead of money. "Mom, you know I have a hard time with death." "Nobody likes death, Jenna." My voice stayed even. "But decent people don't let someone die alone." I held her gaze. "And I buried your father by myself." She swallowed hard. When she finally spoke, her voice carried forced steel. "Fine, so who are you leaving everything to? Logan? A 19-year-old who knows nothing about life." "Knows how to show up," I said. "Knows how to call when it matters. Knows how to apologize. Knows how to visit his grandmother without anyone forcing him." I paused. "Do you know how to do any of those things?" Jenna opened her mouth, but no words came out. Only the magnolia leaves rustled behind her. Finally, she asked, voice lowered but simmering, "So you're cutting me and Michael out?" I didn't answer immediately. I walked inside, retrieved the old folder from the dining table. Support. Jenna. I brought it out and set it on the porch table. Jenna glared at it. "These are the records," I said. $15,000 for the wedding, $8,400 for your roof, $12,000 for Logan's braces, $22,000 when your husband was laid off, and I won't list the rest." She tried to speak, but I continued. "But among all these receipts, Jenna, None show the day you visited your father in the hospital. None show a call to check on him. None show you remembered who he was. Silence, so deep I could hear a crow calling from the oak tree. Finally, she whispered, "I get it. You're punishing us." "No," I said. "I'm correcting my own mistakes." Her eyes narrowed. "So what do you want? You want me to kneel? You want an apology?" I shook my head. "I want you to grow up, but that's something I can't make happen." Jenna inhaled sharply, grabbed her bag. "Fine," she snapped. "If you think the money is everything, then keep it." I studied her face quietly. "No, I'm not keeping it." She stopped walking. "I'm giving it to someone who deserves it." Her expression changed, offended in a way only entitlement can produce. She turned, stomped down the porch steps. But before she reached the car, she flung one last sentence at me, bitter and sharp. "I hope you're happy with your choice." I responded instantly. "I've never been happier." Jenna froze for half a second. Then the SUV engine roared and she sped off. I watched her disappear beneath the Spanish moss. No sadness, no guilt. Only relief, the kind that comes when you finally speak a truth you've swallowed for decades. That night, I stayed in the kitchen longer than usual. I made tea, listened to the wind, felt the house loosen its weight on my chest. I had lost my husband. And this morning, I lost something else. The fear of confronting my own child. But sometimes, to save what remains, you must release what has long been dead. Tomorrow, Michael would come. I knew he would. Jenna's message would make sure of it. And I was ready. The next morning, Savannah smelt like rain. The Spanish moss hanging from the oaks looked threadbare under the gray sky, as if the strings of time were starting to come loose. I was folding laundry on the kitchen table, slowly, carefully, the way you fold up decades of patience, when a knock sounded at the door. It wasn't Logan's knock, gentle, thoughtful. This one was firm, confident, almost entitled, the kind that only stopped short of turning the handle. "Michael." I exhaled. Not sad, not angry, just unsurprised. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and went to open the door. Michael stood there in a perfectly pressed suit, tie still smelling like new store plastic, black shoes polished to a shine. Beside him stood Camille, full makeup, clutch in hand, looking as if she were attending a networking event, not visiting her widowed mother-in-law. "Mom," Michael said with a polite smile he used on clients. "Can we come in?" I opened the door, not inviting, just allowing. They walked in and scanned the living room the way buyers evaluate a property before making an offer. Camille glanced at my wedding photo, at Robert's chair, not with emotion, but as if adding numbers in her head. I sat down, sorting paperwork calmly. "I heard you wanted to talk." Michael interlocked his fingers. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I raised an eyebrow. "You think so?" He nodded and moved closer, resting one hand on the table like a lawyer preparing his argument. "Jenna told me you're changing the will, and I just wanted to hear it directly from you." I met his gaze. "Yes." Michael blinked. He had expected excuses, explanations, a gentle reassurance that I was just considering it. But I was long past the age of asking for permission to do what was right. Camille crossed her legs, voice sweet like honey over ice. "May, we know this is a difficult time, but a decision this major, maybe it can wait? You might not be thinking clearly." I turned to her. "I've been thinking clearly for 30 years. Silence fell, heavy, undeniable. Michael swallowed. "Mom, I know you're upset, but removing me and Jenna from the will..." I cut in. "It's not because I'm upset, it's because I'm clear." Camille stiffened. That sentence hit a place she didn't want Michael to hear. Michael leaned on the table, trying to stay composed. "Mom, I know I haven't been perfect, but you can't just erase us from your life because..." "You're not erased from my life," I said quietly. "You walked out of it." The polite smile vanished from his face. There it was, the real expression of a man who always believed his mother was an unlimited safety net. What do you want then? Michael snapped. You want me to kneel? You want an apology? You want tears? I shook my head. You still don't understand, Michael. I don't want anything from you. Camille stepped in, voice rising. So you're giving everything to Logan? He's a kid. He'll burn through it all. I smiled, a smile I hadn't worn since Robert died. Soft, but sharp. No, Logan won't waste it, because he understands the value of showing up. Camille let out a short, mocking laugh. He's just a college student, May. He knows nothing about money. I know, I said, but he remembered the day his grandfather died. Michael's jaw tightened. Mom, you can't keep throwing the funeral in our faces. Hard to throw it when you weren't there, I replied. Not anger, just truth. Michael faltered, his confidence cracking at the edges. Mom, he said slowly, we have our own lives. We're busy. We can't always. Too busy to say goodbye to your father? Michael had no answer. Camille looked away. I opened the drawer beside me, pulled out an old box. Support, Michael. I set it on the table with a firm thud. Michael's face stiffened as I opened it and poured out years of transfers, receipts, payments I made quietly behind the scenes. This is the busy you always talked about? I asked. $25,000 for that foolproof startup. $14,800 for the new car you needed for safety. $10,000 in tax debt. $9,300 for hospital bills when Sophia was born, and more. I held his gaze. You and Jenna weren't there when your father needed one last word, but I was there when you needed every dollar. Michael flushed, whether from shame or anger I couldn't tell, probably both. Camille stood, chin raised. I think you're being emotional. After a funeral, people often... Don't talk to me about the funeral, I said, my voice rising for the first time. You didn't come. Camille froze. I stood, not tall, not imposing, but unshakably firm. You're not losing everything, I said. You're losing the privilege of assuming I'll always be there. Michael looked away, then back, eyes tight, exhausted, late. So what do you want, Mom? How does this end? Gently, I answered. With the truth. I placed Logan's letter on the table, the one written in the shaky hand of an 11-year-old. Logan remembers me. He visits without reminders. He asked about his grandfather. He showed up when it mattered. I looked straight at Michael. He's not a child, he's family. Michael stared at the letter for a long time, then closed his eyes like the realization crashed over him all at once. Finally, he whispered. So, you've decided. I have. Camille squeezed his hand and tugged. Let's go, she murmured. There's nothing left to say. At the door, Michael turned back, his face tired, hollow, carrying the ache of someone who finally arrived too late. I hope you're happy, he said. I answered softly, steadily. For the first time in my life, I'm not tired anymore. Michael hesitated, just a heartbeat, then walked away. The door closed behind him. The sound didn't echo like loss, it sounded like release. After Michael and Camille left, the whole house fell into a strange kind of quiet. Not the heavy silence of the day Robert died. Not the hollow emptiness of the evening Jenna skipped his funeral. This was different. A lighter silence, like the house had finally exhaled a breath it had been holding for years. I sat in the armchair, resting my hand on the wooden armrest Robert had sanded smooth with his own calloused fingers. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since Robert passed, I felt like I wasn't standing inside grief anymore, but just beyond it. Sometime later, a car pulled up outside, but it wasn't Jenna's impatient engine, nor Michael's polished luxury hum. This one rattled a little, older, familiar. I smiled before I even opened my eyes. Lorraine Campbell, my neighbor for nearly 40 years, the kind of woman who saw everything but only spoke when you were ready to hear it. She didn't wait for me to answer the door. She knocked 3 times and stepped in like the house belonged to her. Elena, she said, placing a tin box on the kitchen table. Shortbread, still warm, and before you say I'm not hungry, I insist you eat one right now. I laughed, a sound I'd nearly forgotten I could make. I'm fine, Lorraine. I know you're fine. she said, taking off her scarf with a dramatic roll of her eyes. And I also know when a woman says she's fine, at least half the sentence is a lie. She opened the tin and handed me a cookie. I took a bite. As always, Lorraine's shortbread tasted better than anything else in the world. She sat across from me, elbows on the table, giving me that look, the kind that doesn't require words. I saw the black SUV. She said, Jenna or Michael? Both. Lorraine nodded and sighed, the sigh of someone who'd seen far too many families like mine. And what did they accomplish? She asked. I told the truth, I said. For the first time in my life, I said everything I had always been afraid would hurt them. And how'd they take it? I shrugged, like people who aren't used to hearing the truth. Lorraine took a sip of tea and tilted her head. Elena, people will say you're being harsh. Nobody likes being cut out of a will. I know. Oh, I know you know, she said, but they'll never say the rest. I looked at her. That for years, you've been the only one feeding, supporting, holding this family together without anyone ever holding you. I placed my cup down gently. Lorraine, I'm not trying to punish them. I just want peace. No revenge, no blame. You're not punishing anyone, she said. You're rebalancing the scale you allowed to lean far too long. She shot me a knowing look. And I knew Robert. He would never want you to live the rest of your life as an ATM or as an excuse for their irresponsibility. My chest tightened, not from pain, but from recognition. Do you think I went too far? I asked quietly. Lorraine laughed out loud. Elena, I've seen Michael walk past your yard like you were the hired help. I've seen Jenna toss her keys on your table and say, Mom, fix it. If standing up for yourself counts as too far, then darling, yes, you went gloriously too far. She placed her hand lightly over mine, a touch shaped by decades of quiet friendship. You did the right thing. I inhaled deeply, the fullest breath I'd taken in days. That afternoon, after Lorraine left, the house felt quiet again, but not empty. I opened the windows and let the late sunlight spill into the living room. It landed on Robert's armchair like a soft smile from somewhere I couldn't see. Another knock at the door, soft, hesitant, careful. I knew before I opened it. Logan. He stood there holding a brown paper bag. I brought food, he said shyly. The girl at the counter heard you live alone, so she added some extra pastries. I smiled. Come in. He stepped inside, scanning the room, his eyes passing over Robert's wooden pieces, our wedding photo, and finally, the funeral notice he never got to see because his mother hid it. He touched the edge of the frame. I'm sorry for not being there. I stepped beside him and placed my hand on his shoulder. You didn't know. I know you didn't know. He turned toward me, eyes red, not dramatic, not performative. Real, sharp, honest. Grandma, I want to help, he said. Fix the porch, the door, or just sit with you when you want company. There were so many things I wanted to say, that he owed me nothing, that his presence was enough, that Robert always saw him as something Michael never allowed himself to be. But I only said, I'm glad you're here. He nodded, then opened the bag. I brought some tools too, thought, maybe I'd fix the porch step today. I laughed softly. Today? He shrugged. If we wait, it'll lean even more. I watched him and saw Robert in the way he stood. Not in looks, but in presence. While Logan knelt and pulled out the old nails from the porch step, I watched from the window. The late sun lit his hair, a few strands falling over his forehead. He worked with steady hands, not clumsy, not rushed, just patient. Like someone who understood that everything important needed time. I stood there a long time, and in that moment I knew. I had left everything to the right person. Not because he needed it, because he deserved it. When Logan came back inside, sweat on his forehead, hands smelling of wood and metal, he said, I think it's okay for now. I'll be back tomorrow, if that's all right. Of course, I said. Before leaving, he paused. Grandma, do you need anything tonight? I looked around the house, at the fading light, at Robert's chair. No, I said softly. I think I'm starting to be all right. Logan nodded and walked out, disappearing beneath the Spanish moss like he was stepping into an old painting. When the door closed behind him, I felt something I hadn't felt since signing Robert's death papers. Real peace. Not peace because everything was fixed. Peace because I had finally let everything fall into its right place. Michael and Jenna would react when they learned the full truth. I knew. There would be a storm, but tonight I would make tea. I would reread one of Robert's old letters. I would crack open a window just enough for the breeze. I would let this house breathe again, and I would breathe with it. 3 days after the confrontation with Michael and Jenna, Savannah turned unseasonably cold. The sky grew darker by the hour. Thick clouds like wet cotton pressed low over the red brick streets around Liberty Street. The wind from the river carried the smell of brackish water, damp moss, and something else. Not rain. Trouble. I knew it the moment I saw the cream-colored envelope inside the mailbox. Harold Benton's office seal was so clear I didn't have to open it to know what was inside. The work was done. The new will. The Logan Whitford Trust. I took the envelope into the house, set it on the kitchen table, and sat down with a deep breath. This day had come sooner than I expected, and more peacefully than I'd imagined. I made myself a cup of ginger tea and placed it next to the unopened papers. My hands didn't shake. I didn't avoid looking at them. I just waited, because I knew this. When a mother finally puts a full stop at the end of a sentence she's been rewriting for decades, the people who have always lived inside that sentence do not stay quiet. And I was right. Barely an hour later, my phone vibrated hard against the table. The screen lit up with 3 words, Michael calling. I didn't answer, not from anger, but because for the first time I believed my silence deserved protection. 5 minutes later, Jenna's name appeared. Mom, what is this? Call me. Another. Mom, this is not funny. Tell me you didn't sign anything. Then a longer one. Logan is a child. You can't be serious. I turned the ringer off and placed the phone face down. The house returned to its steady quiet, punctuated only by the old grandfather clock's slow ticking. The rhythm of someone who no longer has to explain or ask permission. That afternoon, the sky finally broke. Savannah rain isn't like other rain. It doesn't crash down. It speaks. Soft, persistent, like a conversation you've avoided for years. I was folding towels on Robert's old work table when I heard tires screech outside. Then a car door slammed. High heels hit the wet bricks. And a voice. Mom! I closed my eyes for a second. No fear, no rehearsing. I simply opened the door before Jenna could pound on it. She stormed in, hair damp, mascara slightly smudged under her eyes. Not from tears, from rain. She threw her purse onto Robert's armchair. Mom, she said, voice shaking not from cold, but from shock. Harold sent the papers. I just saw. Did you really sign them? I nodded. Jenna looked at me like she couldn't believe a mother could do what I'd done and not crumble under the weight of her children's disapproval. You abandoned us? For some kid? Her voice sharpened, brittle as glass. No, I answered calmly. I didn't abandon you. You abandoned me first. She stepped closer, eyes reddening, with anger, not pain. Mom, I am your daughter, Jenna said, pressing a hand to her chest like it was evidence. I have a right. You have choices, I said, and you chose not to show up at your father's funeral. She clenched her fist, then stepped back. You're punishing me for 1 day? It's not 1 day. My voice stayed gentle but clear as rain against glass. It's years. Jenna opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The room grew so quiet we could hear each raindrop tapping against the window pane. Finally, she said, I can't believe you did this without talking to us first. I set the towel down. I've been talking to you for 30 years, I said. You just haven't been listening. She inhaled sharply as if swallowing a stone, and then the door swung open again. Michael walked in. No knock, no pause, no courtesy. He glanced around the room as if the scene had been waiting exactly for his entrance. Mom, he said, voice low and hard. We just came from Harold's office. I don't understand how you could do this. I didn't get up. I let them stand there, two grown children still expecting their mother to defend every decision as if she were the one who had done something wrong. Michael stepped closer. I'm going to be honest with you, he began. This isn't just about money. This is about loyalty? I asked. Or presence? His jaw tightened. I'm busy. I have a family. I can't just run over here every time. Why can Logan? I asked. Both of them fell silent. I stood then and looked at my children, not with rage, but with the clarity of a woman who has finally stopped being afraid of losing what she never truly had. You think I chose Logan over you, I said. But the truth is, I chose the person who still chooses me. Jenna's fist clenched again. Michael's breath came out hard, like the words had hit him physically. I walked to the table and pulled out Logan's letter, old, pencil smudged at the corner. I placed it in front of them. This, I said quietly, is the only thing in years that has made me feel like I still mattered inside my own family. Jenna glanced at it, then looked away. Michael stared longer, but his eyes didn't soften. Mom, he said at last, his voice finally losing its edge. I get that you're hurt. I do. But this can't be undone. I nodded. You're right. It can't. Then I said the sentence I knew would close one door and open another I had long deserved. And I don't want it undone. They stood there, wet from the rain, barely moving, two trembling shadows under the dim kitchen light. Once, this had been a loud house. Once, it had been full of laughter. Now, it was three strangers standing in the ruins of something they never bothered to maintain. Finally, Jenna spoke. Fine, if this is what you want, then live with it. Michael echoed. And don't expect anything from us anymore. I replied, I haven't. Jenna turned first. Michael followed. Neither bothered to close the door gently. When the SUV pulled away from Liberty Street, I stood in the doorway, hand over my chest. No devastation, no collapse, just a small, honest sadness, the kind that comes when you finally admit that people you love never really stayed. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table listening to the rain and thought, sometimes you have to lose two children to realize you still have a family. And tomorrow Logan would come back, and with him, the part of the story he deserved to know. The next morning, Savannah opened into sunlight after the rain. A thin golden veil draped over the old rooftops of the century-old houses. The air was so clear I could hear the carriage wheels on Riverwalk and the soft drop of sparrows landing on the porch rail. I was steeping a fresh pot of tea when I heard the knock, that rhythm again, not urgent, not demanding, not accusing, Logan. I opened the door and there he was, shoes damp with morning dew, holding a paper bag from the bakery near Madison Square. I brought the waffles you like, he said. It rained so much yesterday, I thought you might have been cold. I smiled and let him in. Unlike Michael and Jenna, he stepped inside with the quiet respect of someone who understands the value of another person's space. He didn't fill the room, he didn't impose, he simply arrived. His eyes fell on the sealed document from Harold's office still sitting on my kitchen table. What's that, Grandma? I didn't dodge the question. There was nothing left to dodge. It's the revised will, I said, and saying it out loud made my breath steadier somehow. He froze for a moment, waiting for the rest. I pointed to the chair. Sit, Logan. There's something I need to tell you. He set the bag down, pulled the chair out gently, careful not to scrape it, and sat across from me like a grown man, not a child thrown into the center of adult business. I opened the file, no hiding, no softening. This house, the cabin on the island, and all of my accounts. His eyes widened, not with greed, not excitement, just a deep, startled sincerity. We'll go to you. He didn't speak, not for a long time, almost a full minute. A minute so long the hallway clock seemed to echo each tick like a truth unfurling. Finally, he whispered, I don't understand. Why me? I rested my hand on the papers, the way one rests a hand on a memory. Because you're the only one who came back. Logan swallowed hard, like the words caught on something tender inside him. I just thought you needed someone, he said softly. But I didn't do anything to deserve. You did more than you know. I looked into his eyes, the way a mother looks at a child who knows how to love. You came without being asked. You showed up at your grandfather's funeral because you cared, not because it was expected. You checked on me without waiting for a text. You helped even when no one told you to. You never treated me like a duty. His head dropped, lips pressed tight. All of that, I said quietly, is love, and love deserves to be honored. Logan inhaled shakily, then lifted his eyes. What about my mom and Uncle Michael? My answer was steady. You didn't take anything from them. They only lost what they never held. He fell silent, not with defensiveness or guilt, but with thoughtfulness. I knew this moment weighed heavier on him than on me, because for the first time, he had to see his parents as the people they were, not the people he hoped they'd be. I don't want to be the reason the family gets even more broken, he said quietly. I took his hand. Logan, the family cracked a long time ago. You're just the only one who noticed. We sat in that soft stillness for a few minutes. Then brakes screeched outside. I recognized the sound instantly. I'd heard it yesterday. This time it wasn't Jenna, it wasn't Michael, it was both. They stormed into the house without knocking, as if they still believed mothers weren't allowed to close doors on their grown children. Michael stood in front, Jenna right behind him, both flushed. From anger or from the sun, I couldn't tell. They looked at Logan as if he'd stolen a throne they assumed would be theirs. Mom, Michael said. No greeting, no kindness. We need to talk, alone. I'm not going anywhere, Logan said, calm but firmer than I'd ever heard him. Jenna stepped forward, her voice sharp as a blade. You don't belong in this conversation. Logan didn't step back, didn't bow, didn't apologize. I'm the only one who showed up. The shock on Jenna's face was almost physical. Michael leaned over the table, voice urgent. Mom, you're being manipulated. Do you even know what he's telling you, what he's doing to? I stood and slammed my palm onto the table. For the first time in years, they both fell silent. Enough, I said, my voice not loud, but final. I turned to Michael. You're questioning me now, but you weren't here when they lowered your father's coffin into the ground. Jenna opened her mouth, but I turned to her. And you said your nail appointment couldn't be moved, yet somehow my will is supposed to be flexible. They froze, struck by the kind of truth that doesn't scream, it carves. I took a breath. You didn't come when your father died. You didn't come when I was hurting. You didn't come when I needed you. But you came the moment you saw there was something to lose. No one spoke. No excuses, no justifications. Only Logan's quiet breath beside me, not afraid, but hurting for me. Then Jenna whispered, voice cracking, Mom, we're your children. I nodded. Yes, but you stopped being my people. Michael turned away, gripping the back of the chair, his voice thin, almost breaking. You're going to regret this. I walked to the front door and opened it. If regret is the price of peace, I'll pay it. They stared at me for another second, then both walked out. When their car pulled away from Liberty Street, Logan turned to me. Grandma, you did it. I looked at him, the kind of look that sees a future instead of a past. No, I said, placing my hand on my heart. I'll have done it when everything is signed, when you stand beside me like you did today, when this house stops feeling empty because of who isn't here. I smiled softly. That's when I'll know. Logan squeezed my hand. I'll be there, always. And for the first time in months, I believed him. The next morning, Savannah blurred under a thick layer of fog, like the breath of an old man resting against a window. I pulled back the curtain and stared into the backyard, where the magnolia bushes bent under the weight of the mist, as if they were carrying a story no one had bothered to ask about. I thought, after yesterday's confrontation, the house would feel heavy, but strangely, it didn't. It felt light, as if someone had opened a window I hadn't seen. I was making tea when I heard a soft thud on the porch. An envelope, pale yellow, with slanted familiar handwriting. Not Logan's, not Jenna's, not Michael's, Robert's. I knew his handwriting immediately, strong strokes leaning slightly to the left, like a man always in a hurry not to miss life. The envelope was so thin I could almost see the paper inside trembling with the breeze. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened it with hands that were still not as steady as I liked to pretend. The paper inside was slightly yellowed with age. Elena, if you're reading this, it means I've gone ahead of you. I know you'll be strong, but sometimes being too strong makes people think you don't need anyone. I want you to remember this. We lived a real life, even if our children never fully saw it. I set the letter down for a moment, then kept reading. If, in the end, you find yourself standing alone, I trust you'll choose the right person to carry what we spent a lifetime building. Not the one who shares our last name, the one who shares our heart. My heartbeat slowed. I could almost feel Robert standing behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder, the way he did on the days he could tell I was close to breaking but refused to say it. I folded the letter and placed it on the table, then walked to Robert's office, the room I had locked the day he died. I turned the key. The smell of old wood and joint ointment still clung to the air. On the desk sat the old cherrywood box he used for important things. I opened it and found a thick stack of documents tied with a thin string and a navy blue notebook. The words on the cover, "For the one who stays." I picked it up and opened to the first page, just one sentence. If the kids don't stand with you, don't stand with them. I inhaled deeply and let the air out slowly. Robert had lived long enough to see all of this coming before I ever dared to. I touched the stack of papers, cool, heavy sheets. When I opened them, I found something even more startling. Proof that Michael and Jenna had borrowed from their father for years and never paid a cent back. Hotel bills, bank transfers, rescue money for Michael's short-lived business ventures, amounts Jenna borrowed for a spa investment, all carefully recorded and kept. Not to hold over their heads, but to keep a record of the truth. On the last page, in his handwriting, Robert had written, "If either of them ever comes back for the money instead of for you, they were never your heirs." I had to sit down, not because of the money, not because of the betrayal, because Robert had seen everything long before I found the courage to open my eyes. While I was holding the notebook, Logan appeared in the doorway, shoes damp with dew. "You opened it," he said, glancing toward the room. "Can I come in?" I nodded. He stepped in carefully, the way a person enters someone else's memories. When his eyes landed on the documents, he paused. "Is that what I think it is?" I handed him the stack. When your grandfather was alive, he knew more than we thought. He flipped through the first page, the second, the third. I watched his expression shift from surprise to sadness, to something that looked very much like resolve. "Grandma, you don't owe anyone an explanation," Logan said quietly. "Not them, not anyone." I looked at him longer than I thought I could look at anyone without crying. "If you hadn't come that day," I said slowly, "I would have believed I'd failed." Logan shook his head. "You didn't fail," he said. "They just chose to walk away." He didn't choke on the words. He didn't dress them up. He just said them, plain and true, and something inside me unlocked. That afternoon, while I was organizing papers at the kitchen table, a familiar car pulled up outside. Not fast like usual, just slow, tired. I looked out the window. Meredith. Not Michael, not Jenna, just her. The woman who was always put together, now with messy hair and a wrinkled coat, like she'd walked through a storm and hadn't stopped to fix herself. She held a plain white envelope with no name on the front. I opened the door. She hesitated. "May I come in?" she asked. I didn't answer with words. I just stepped aside. She walked into the kitchen and sat, clasping her hands as if she were trying to warm them up. "I came to," she stopped, searching for steady ground in her own voice. "To tell the truth. The one no one else will say." I stayed silent. Meredith looked down at the envelope. "I know Michael is here for the money," she said. "I know Jenna is too. I know they're making you the villain." I met her eyes. "What do you want, Meredith?" She slid the envelope toward me. "I want you to know. Logan isn't like his father. He's not like anyone in that house except you and Robert." Something shifted in my chest. "I came to do the right thing," she whispered, "before they start writing the wrong story." I didn't open the envelope yet. I asked just one question. "Do you regret it?" She nodded, and for the first time I saw complete honesty in her face. "Yes, a lot." After she left, I opened the envelope. Messages, emails, everything showing that Michael and Jenna had known about Robert's death much earlier than they claimed. They just chose not to come. A choice, not forgetfulness, not busyness, not an accident. A choice. I sat down. My breathing slowed, oddly, not from pain, but from relief, because now I knew I wasn't wrong. As the sun dropped low, casting gold across the old wooden floor, Logan came in. "Grandma, are you okay?" I set the envelope on the table. "More okay than I've ever been." He looked at me, then at the papers. "I know what you're about to do," he said quietly. I smiled. "And you'll be here, won't you?" "Always." Just that one word, but it was the thing I'd been waiting my whole life to hear without knowing it. I brought the entire stack of documents to Harold Benton's office the next morning. One of those Savannah mornings so clear the magnolia shadows looked hand-painted across the sidewalks. A light breeze drifted in from the Hudson side of the river, carrying the faint salt of the water and a thin layer of moisture that clung to the hem of my coat. Harold rose as soon as I walked in. No long condolences, no probing questions. He simply looked at me like a man who understood that today I was laying half my life to rest so I could finally live the other half. "Are you certain, Elena?" he asked quietly, his hand resting on the file. "More certain than anything I've ever done," I said. The pen touched paper, the signature of a woman who had paused long enough to understand what was left, what was gone, and what was never hers to hold. No trembling, no regret, no anger, only clarity. Harold closed the file, pressing the edges down as if to seal the weight of the moment. "That's it," he said. "The assets will transfer into the Logan Whitford Trust. No one, not even your children, can intervene." I nodded. Something dropped inside my chest. Not a stone, not a burden. Something released. I thanked Harold and stepped out into the warmth. The sunlight brushed over my hands, lighting up the age spots like tiny lanterns, and I realized they hadn't taken anything from me. I was the one who had given away too much. When I reached home, Logan was standing on the porch, sleeves rolled up, paint smudged at his elbow. "I fixed the railing," he said, smiling a little. I thought, maybe this house deserves to breathe again. I walked up the steps. The railing was newly sanded, stained a soft honey gold that reminded me of early autumn. It wasn't perfect, not straight like a professional job, but it was full of care. "It's good," I said, running my hand along the grain. "Your grandfather would have liked it." Logan looked around the yard at the bougainvillea vines that had dried out last year. "I was thinking, in spring, maybe we could replant everything," he said. "Not just flowers, something that lasts. Rosemary, kale, maybe carrots." A soft laugh escaped me, a sound I thought had belonged to an earlier decade. "We will," I said. "Any season can start again if someone is willing to tend it." He smiled, the same smile he had as a boy running through this yard, but with the eyes of a man who understood duty, gratitude, and presence. That afternoon, I opened all the windows. The breeze swept in, carrying damp earth, old wood, and the faint scent of grass from the park nearby. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. The empty corners no longer echoed. It breathed. And so did I. I brought out the old sewing machine from 1984, the one that had gathered dust since Robert became too weak to climb the stairs. I wiped it down, oiled the gears, threaded a new spool. I sewed new curtains for the kitchen, a soft Savannah blue, the shade of sky you see on days when no one expects anything from you anymore. The stitches were crooked, uneven, but they were mine. When I hung them up, Logan walked in with a broom. "They look beautiful," he said. "I think this house is starting to come back to life." I turned to him. "It's not the house, Logan." He paused and understood. That evening, I cooked the first proper meal I'd made in weeks. Lemon rosemary roasted chicken, sweet potatoes, and crisp bread from the bakery. I set out 2 plates, not out of obligation, but because Logan had said he'd return after getting more tools. And he did, on time, the way Robert always did. We ate in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Halfway through the meal, Logan set his fork down. "Grandma, I want to do more," he said. "Not just fix things. I want to keep this place the way you and Grandpa built it." I looked at him, not blinking, not interrupting. "I want to turn this into a place where kids like I was, kids who get forgotten, can come, learn something real, the way he taught me to use a hammer." And for a moment, I saw Robert standing beside him, not in body, but in the compassion and instinct that lived on in the one person who had truly stayed. I placed my hand over Logan's. "Then do it," I said softly. "This house has never been more worth living in." Logan smiled, the smile of someone who knows that family is not blood, but presence. Night settled. I carried a cup of hot tea to the back porch. Dew settled across the grass like a thin silver blanket. The stars felt freshly polished. I sat in the rocking chair, the one Robert used to read in every summer night. I didn't cry. I didn't try to pull him back. I just whispered into the quiet. "Robert, I finally came home. Not to this old wooden house, but to a place with no more empty expectations. A place where I didn't have to beg for kindness from my own children. A place where I was seen, truly." I closed my eyes. The night breeze brushed my shoulder, soft as Robert's hand on our wedding day. I'd lost a lot, but I no longer lost myself. And if this story touched a quiet corner of your heart, leave a comment so I know you're here, listening. And if you'd like more real, tender, deep stories, the kind that hurt where they need to hurt, but warm where you need warmth, click like and subscribe. You never know, sometimes one story is all it takes for someone to find their way back home.